So how do we create the base for the Obicularis oculi, the muscle itself? For me, the simplest approach is simply to duplicate the eyes. Obicularis oculi. And then pull out from here using the move brush. Let's turn symmetry on and get just the general shape. What I want you to really be mindful of is how much that Obicularis oculi is going to overlap the orbit of the eye. So if the orbit of our eye is something akin to this, the Obicularis oculi is going to wrap quite a ways around. More than you tend to think in the beginning stages. Definitely connecting up with the zygomatic minor. Definitely overlapping the levator labii superioris. And definitely intermingling in there with the anglici nasii. So I'm going to move this in just a little bit. We don't need to have it interfere that much. Dig in until you can find the orbit of the eye and really just give that eye some prominence for most of its width. And do not spare the rod with this one. Just push this in, get that inner cavity defined. Pull out when you encounter skeletal structures, but it's better to add the thickness with knowledge than to just have some inflated portion in there that you're not sure about. You can also try the Z-Project brush. But I find this just as easy. All right, once you've got this roughly laid out, it's thin, it exposes the majority of the eyeball, and it encompasses all of the bone. And again, you have the orbit of the eye largely defined. There's not a lot of volume. Thin is the key operative term here. We need to start thinking about and talking about the parts of the eye. So if we're to start thinking or discussing just the terminology, the first thing that we've got right in front of us is the Obicularis oculi. Okay, the Obicularis oculi is the name for the muscle, the eye muscle. But there are several parts to this that you want to keep in mind. There is what's known as the orbital part and the palpebral portion. Orbital portion, palpebral portion. Any idea what the palpebral portion is? This is going to be your eyelids. The eyelids are the palpebral portion. The orbital portion is all of that which is touching the orbit, the skeletal structure around the eye. The palpebral portion is that area where, as we're going to learn here shortly, we have the palpebral ligaments. The palpebral ligaments are essentially the eyelids. And they connect in two places that are really important for us to keep in mind. Inside and outside, right? But let's talk about the inside corner of the eye and where the palpebral ligament connects there. To do that, I'm going to turn the eye muscle off. Let's look at this from a 3/4 view. The palpebral ligament inside the caruncula, as they also call it, that is going to sweep over and above the lacrimal groove. So remember the lacrimal groove here. The palpebral ligament is going to be above that, connecting to the frontal process of the maxilla. Remember the frontal process that we placed here. So above that, right there at the tip, that's where we're going to get it. Then the form is going to wrap around the eyeball, and it's going to connect here to the frontocephaloidal process of the maxilla, i.e. this column right here. It's going to attach slightly towards the upper portion of that as well. Not the lower portion, but slightly up towards the upper portion. That's going to give us a little bit more room for the eyeball up there. They say that there is a very specific form here that you can find. I think it's called the molar tubercle. If you can find that on a model, then you can usually find where this is going to insert. The palpebral ligament splits into two, and so that's how we get the two portions here. Upper lid, the upper portion, and the lower portion. Now in terms of the eye and the palpebral ligament, we're going to have a couple of really important forms. The lower portion of the eyelid, you're going to see this as we go, but this is going to be largely conforming to the eyelid itself, and the shape that you have in there is going to be designed to hug that form, hug that eyelid. Then we're going to have another form that's going to come out, and this is going to bridge the distance with the orbit of the eye. So we're going to have these two portions of that lower eyelid that we look at, and those are largely mirrored up here as well. We have the one portion, and then we have another area for fat to bridge the distance between the orbit of the eye and the brow. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail on the Obicularis oculi. First thing I'm going to do is try to find the upper eyelid, and I'll do that with clay buildup and just sketch from left to right. Notice how I am sketching all the way around this round form going against the grain of the muscle. It's just to round it. Okay, and when you think about the inside corner of the eye, one of the things that we tend to do is try to just draw a nice straight linear line into it, and then the caruncula starts to look really long. So let's look at this from a front view. You know, it's not bad, but something's wrong. So what I want you to make sure that you do is separate that eyelid, that palpebral ligament. I'm describing the anatomy, but I want you to forget about the anatomy for a moment. And I want to make sure that there is a form in between them, almost like a safe zone. And then the eye itself is going to pick up that form and go from there. But make sure you have a safe zone in between them, or you're going to start to get a bit lost with the form. I know I do. So I've got that just hard-coded in me. I just come through, I separate them, make sure the caruncula is in there. And the ligament that attaches them ends up being this kind of concave surface. Let's turn transparency on. I'm going to move that in a little bit. I'm lining this up with the nose. The caruncula is on the slight outside and inside, I should say. It's actually going to penetrate that line. And from a side view, I'm going to move that back so it rounds with that with that eye. And from below, with perspective on, we should have a nice clean wraparound for that eye. That's a good position. It might seem like a lot of space in between here, but that's a pretty solid wraparound that we have right now. I'm going to dig that lower eyelid in to make it really conform to that eyeball, and a 3/4 view is immensely helpful at this point. Make sure you give that eyeball or the muscle itself enough thickness. You might have seen me sculpting it pretty close to the bone there, but we sculptors, we live with thickness, so don't be afraid to get that with a lot more to catch the light. The thicker it is, the more solid it feels, and just the better off the form is. So you can see I'm using move to push that eyelid out, and use move to push that upper eyelid out as well. Again, one thing that's really important to keep in mind, just like with the lower and upper lip, one of them is going to be dominant, and in this case the upper lid is again dominant. Okay, I'm going to put a line in here to separate that upper eyelid. Get a nice clean form. Not thinking about the fat above the brow right now, or underneath the brow. It's very far from a concern. I'm just thinking about how to get a nice, clean, solid upper eyelid that is dominant over the lower eyelid.